Greetings, everyone. This is Rock and Roll Spot Connection with Weekly Comic Book Roundup. And normally we would be starting off with this week's X-Men titles, but, well, there were two. And one of them is a King in Black tie-in, so we'll be starting with this week's King in Black tie-ins. Kicking things off with Thunderbolts, #1. So, Thunderbolts was actually hinted at in King in Black #2. Wilson Fisk entered the bar with no name and basically said, hey, who wants to make some money? And so, these should begin to the press conference from Fisk, basically saying that the Thunderbolts were given a top-secret mission by him, and while they succeeded in their mission, they died completing it. So we flash back to a few days earlier. A group of villains are in his office. He's mad at them because they're basically not paying him to operate in New York like they're supposed to. And so he's basically told them, hey, you can either do a job for me, or you can go to lockup. One of the villains, a guy named Incendiary, says he'll take his chances in lockup because he's seen what's going on outside. So a couple of guards escort him outside, and another Ampere, another one I've never heard of, starts to say the same thing. There's a gunshot from outside the room, and Fisk says, oh, it seems to say you're here to escape custody. What a shame. And so Ampere promptly changes his mind, realizes that, no, Incendiary didn't try to escape. The guards were straight up ordered to just execute him. So Fisk then gives him a lowdown, explains to Mr. Fear who Star is, that basically she's the heavy, and that everyone else's job is to protect her, to make sure that she doesn't die on the way, that she's able to, save the day. She's able to save the day. But he does state that since these Thunderbolts, or since this team will be working for him, and he's outlawed mass vigilantes, they will be operating without masks. No one likes that idea at all. Also, he informed them that they're called the Thunderbolts, in part because Fisk owns the copyright to the name. As they're making their way through the city, one of the dragons eats one of their members. Excuse me. And basically, Mr. Fear and Star work together to Mr. Fear to distract Star to kill the dragon. Ampere decide, however, Star kind of overexerts herself, which and faints in Batrock's arms, leaving Ampere basically say, oh, hey, if our heavy is going to faint from using her powers, I'm out. And so Mr. Fear kills him, and he takes Ampere's electrified gauntlets and whatnot, and basically hands them out to everyone else. At the same time, however, Taskmaster's informed by Rhino that Rhino's leaving. And, well, yeah, Taskmaster's not going to argue with the Rhino. Sure, he can copy any any fighting movie you've ever seen, but that's not going to do much against, well, the Rhino. So, yeah. They make their way through, and when they pass a jewelry store, Mr. Fear attempts to steal some jewelry, but Taskmaster insists that he put it back. And there's something going on up ahead, and they go to find out and discover that Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist are fighting a bunch of null-possessed people. And they come across one of those people, and it makes a move for them. And then using the since he's now wearing Ampere's power coil bracers, Taskmaster's got electricity going through his sword and cuts off the symbiote guy's head. And apparently Batroc was completely unaware that there's actually a person inside Venom. as Taskmaster informs them, and they discover that, in fact, the creature they just killed was Ampere. But now more are coming after them, so they make a run for it. Turns out that Batroc has taken some of the power coils from Ampere and put them on his legs, and uses them to knock the symbiotes back. And they get to the dock, but it looks like maybe Batroc's too slow. However, he leaps and just barely manages to make it, and wasn't touched by the symbiotes. Apparently, their destination is Ravencroft, though, and the person they're there to meet to figure out how to save the world is none other than Norman Osborn, who is waiting for them. Which actually makes sense because Norman Osborn did, once save the world from an alien invasion. That is where the issue ends. Which brings us to our next book of the week. King in Black, Planet of the Symbiotes, number 1. So this one's actually going to be a bit of an interesting title. It's an anthology book. Two short single shot stories each time for the next 3 months. Counting this one's the first month, so through March. The first one focuses on Scream. She rescues a young boy from being killed by the other 4 null-controlled Life Foundation symbiotes. The other 4 then combine into hybrid, and Null starts to speak through them. And while, yes, Scream does at least somewhat... Scream's current host, having access to heat and fire powers, does kind of help against hybrid. However, with Null kind of pulling the strings, they are actually seemingly able to absorb Scream into themselves. However, she uses her powers and explodes outwards. It reveals her face to the boy who the symbiotes were attacking. They were looking for Dylan Brock. And tries to get him to safety. As Andy tries to get the kid to safety, it does seem that the liquefied remains of Hybrid are making their way towards an open manhole. Which brings us to our next story, set in Ravencroft Asylum. At the beginning of Null's attack, some of the symbiote dragons appear. 2 of the guards are outside talking, and one of them rushes back inside. Narration reveals that this guard is part of the cult of Null. And there was an emissary to Null hidden. And so he goes into the hidden chamber and discovers Null has found an emissary. The remains of Cortland Cassidy. Turns out that Cortland Cassidy has spread more death, destruction, and darkness in Null's name than anyone else. And so, Null brings him back as Plague. He promptly absorbs the life force of the guard, and then the guards that follow him in, and then he does fight. He faces Manwolf. And since Manwolf was possessed by a symbiote, there is a bit of a link to Null and Manwolf. Misty Knight manages to come in and level things out for a moment until Plague starts stealing life force from the both of them, as well as the additional guards. But before he can really do any serious damage, it turns out that Cortland's Plague's presence is required elsewhere. And so he's off to kill Eddie Brock for killing Cletus Cassidy, his descendant. As the story ends, Manwolf informs Misty to notify their superiors because they have a new target. And that is where the issue ends. Which brings us to our next book for the week. King in Black, Gwenem versus Carnage. So, there was a Spider-Gwen arc entitled Gwenem. Basically dealt with... Basically, she wears a symbiote costume that's similar to the Venom symbiote. It's artificial instead of, actual Clintar, though. And, yeah. And in recent events, she's been driven from her Earth, Earth 65, by the recently returned Human Torch and Sue Storm. Or Johnny and Sue Storm. But she's been attending college. Before she was driven away, she's been attending Empire State University on Earth 616, so she just, moved there. Though the Earth 616 Jackal is over on Earth 65, and just as still obsessed with Gwen Stacy. So the issue begins with Gwen narrating about what's happened. Apparently, her roommates missed the evac call, but she's doing reconnaissance. She tries to save someone, but the symbiote goop overtakes the person and actually tries to even overtake Gwen's webbing before creating another symbiote drone. One of her roommates is busy making weapons. Turns out that part of what she was doing was trying to find a way out of there, because they're the only... Apparently, they're the only people in the wing of their building they're in that missed the evac. However, one of the dragons slams through their wall, and Gwen tries to fight it off, and tries to lead the dragon away from her roommates. However, when she does defeat the dragon, she goes back and discovers that it got her roommates. She then uses her webbing to ride the dragon and crash into a building. And as she falls, she uses her teleportation necklace. And something weird happened. We get a flashback to R65. Apparently, the Jackal has kidnapped Mary Jane Watson, and he ended up with some of Spider-Gwen, Ghost Spider's spiders, the spiders that make up her costume, and, well, he pours them over MJ, and something happens. There's a involving teleportation, and suddenly MJ pops out of... Mary Jane pops out of Ghost Spider. As they land in symbiote goop, which gets all over MJ, Null begins to watch, noting that Ghost Spider's costume is interesting. It seems to be his, but not his. Something else, something like him. And so now he's going to acquire the costume. And so the spiders combined with the symbiote goop basically turned Earth 65 MJ into a creature of Null's design. Who takes on the name of Null's most favorite disciple, Carnage. And that is where the issue ends. Which brings us to the Union, number 2. Where we left off, the Union was basically showing off, when Null began his attack. And the leader of the Union, legendary British hero Britannia, was killed while killing one of the symbiote dragons. And the goop that the dragon itself left behind seemed to possess some of the British soldiers that were also there for the exercise. We go to the flashback a few months ago in Cardiff, or 10 months ago in Cardiff, as the choir is running from police. Britannia knocks one of the cops out, though, and basically says, she wants to help choir. Now they're all, the news is learning that, yes, Britannia has died. Camera drone comes along to where the remaining members of the team are standing, and one of the nullified guards grabs the drone and crushes it, causing a brief surge of electricity, which seems to be a weakness, which, of course, everyone knows it's a weakness from the other tie-ins, but yeah. So a fight begins between the other members between the Union and the nullified soldiers, and during it, choir gets taken over by some of the symbiote goop. While all that happens, Null had over the course of the next 20 minutes, Null has managed to cover the Earth in symbiote goop, and he's made planetfall. They learn what's going on, and turns out that their benefactor, the Union's benefactor, Steve Darwin, actually caught on video, thanks to his phone, the nullified guard crushing the camera, being briefly electrocuted, and the symbiote goop retreating. So they press their attack. But choir holds a child hostage, basically, saying, telling Union Jack to drop Britannia's sword, or the kid dies. So he does, and also Kelpie has flooded the area. While Union Jack talks with the nullified choir, Darwin hooks up the sword to a generator, and then ends up tossing the sword back to Union Jack, who then slams the blade into the ground, the water-soaked ground, and electrifying a bunch of people, as well as destroying the generator. Once all is said and done, the remaining members of the Union, choir, Kelpie, who's no longer been, the electrocution did manage to get rid of the null essence of her, and Snakes tell Union Jack that they're quitting the team. Team's done. They were only there for Britannia. However, their government liaison basically informs Union Jack that Jack's got a contract with the government. If Britannia dies, he takes over the team, and he takes over as acting team leader until a fitting replacement can be found. So yeah, he's first told he's either got to get his team back, or he's getting tossed in the Tower of London. And that is where the issue ends. And so our last book for this video is Sword, number 2. Second issue, we're already leaping into King in Black. So in New York, someone possessed by a symbiote watching what everything that's going on. Tells a joke, saying there's an old joke. Where was Gwenem when the lights went out? In the dark. Brand is basically a sit rep from everyone. WizKid is doing what he can to figure out ways to bring back communications. Manifold is working on the possibility of basically teleporting everyone. Medical Energy are not doing anything at the moment. Frenzy, diplomatic, when it comes to diplomacy, Frenzy's managed to get information from Galactic Council about what they know about Null. Alpha and also informs Brand that Alpha has yet to respond to what's going on. For some reason, Brand can't raise Cable. Then an analysis, Metallo, who's on the toilet. And she tells him she wants him on the launch pad in 2 minutes because he's got a mission. We also got Brand's personnel notes on Metallo, who's well aware of the fact that he is the best telepath that she could get. We also it's sort of explain why he's the best telepath she can get. Because, yes, he's a mutant, but he has no ideology. His loyalty is to money. Just money. So she actually needs someone with that kind of mentality in the organization. So yeah, he's the best she could get. And so a handful of Pybok, Frenzy, Fabian Cortez, some of the others are headed down to Krakoa. One of the Peak's onboard weapons takes out a symbiote dragon. Turns out that Metallo's not going with everyone else, though. He's going on his own secret mission. And Brand tells him that she's lowering her mental defenses a little, and tells him to read her service thoughts and to look for Protocol V, which shocks Metallo, as he says that Protocol V is unthinkable. And so she says, and yet, I thought it. But she explains that, thinking the unthinkable is what she does every day. And today they're up against a primordial god of darkness, a potentially unstoppable force, so according to the data she got from the Galactic Council, it's already murdered nearly a dozen populated worlds. And he said, and she said, you think Earth can't be next? And, I'm telling the superheroes, though. She's just like, heroes can fall. I have to plan for that. But there is something he's going to need for her to plan. On Krakoa, Random, Cortez, Pybok, and Frenzy arrive. They're dealing with and the mutants are dealing with one of those symbiote dragons. Sunfire does what he can and blasts a hole in it, but he gets injured and falls and breaks his legs. So Cortez goes to help him, boosting him. And a boosted Sunfire flies through the Krakoan dragon. There's also some personnel notes on Fabian Cortez, explaining he has the exact parts required for the vital exploration and retrieval missions they're conducting in higher space, so they need him on board. However, he's also he's also a treacherous sack of yuppie pus who will stab any bag or kiss any behind for a taste of power. And she can fob him off as a meaningless title for now, but that won't solve his ambition forever, and it's possible something he has on the council might fall for the shtick, or she can create a long-term solution. She has 4 long-term potential replacements. There's Michael Nolan. However, Nolan, the downside with Nolan is that his ex-wife, Susan Nolan, being a baseline human, can't be resurrected. Next up is Brian Dunlop, or Boost. Amplifies powers by merging bodily with other mutants. As such, he cannot amplify more than one at a time. Still very useful. Consider for a security team or a redacted post. Next is Absalom Mercator, or Mr. M. Unavailable. Whereabouts unknown. Then there's a redacted entry, explaining that primary loyalty is most likely redacted. That said, the person fits all other criteria with the added bonus that something concerning the Snark War. In the Arbor Magna hatchery, the 5 are kind of bummed that they're having to sit the whole thing out, but it's also kind of a, hey, if we go out and fight, who's going to heal? Who's going to resurrect everyone that gets killed? Or who's going to, if we get killed, who resurrects us? And then Mentallo shows up in his think tank, which is apparently a personnel carrier. Apparently, mass evacuation is what Protocol V was. Elsewhere, Magneto and Cortez share a word. Magneto thanks Cortez for his service, and Cortez explains that he's been encouraged to make his power-boosting treatments less craveable. He also explained that he'd like to speak to the Council in regard to certain national policy matters pertaining to humans, though he does not use the term humans. Though it's clear that Magneto's not too thrilled with the fact of Cortez calling humans flat scans. But he also thinks that maybe it could be constructive. Frenzy sees this and, basically says, great, history repeating itself. As years previously, Cortez suckered Magneto into taking him in and boosted his powers in a way, in a manner that was addictive, and then seemingly killed Magneto. However, through one of the gates, a hand comes out. It's Cable, possessed by by some of the symbiote goo. And that is where the issue ends. That's it for now. As always, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Links to my Facebook, Twitter, Patreon, and PayPal can be found in the description box down below. This is Rock and Roll Spock signing off, saying, live long and rock hard.